So today's lecture and next week's lecture are actually two of my favorites within public relations because they are the bread and butter. They're what you need to have. And today's is probably the most complicated out of those two lectures. So I highly encourage you to take a lot of notes. Stay focused because this is where you get into the how to do public relations. We've talked about the four-step process: research, programming, implementation, evaluation. Today we're covering the first two, research and programming. Next week we'll cover the second two, implementation and evaluation. So we'll kind of be going through a lot. We're going to try to break it up, do some activities, that sort of thing. If you have a question, shoot your hand in the air. I'm happy to answer it as we go. But that's kind of the layout for today. So like I said, we do have how we approach public relations. And all of you are working on your campaign that you're reviewing, and you'll be looking at these four steps. So to truly understand how to do that, to really do stellar on that paper, and as you're moving towards making your own campaigns, you need to understand a deeper level. Not just we're doing programming, not just we want to do research, but what does that mean? How do you use the proper terms? How do you get the information you need? How do you set it up in a meaningful way that can get you strategic results? So we'll start with research. Anyone familiar with research? Have you guys had research classes yet? Okay. A couple of you have a little bit of a familiarity. If you're not, don't be intimidated. Research used to scare me because I thought it was highly scientific, that I wasn't qualified, I didn't know how to get the information. But essentially, research is just you saying, what do I need and how do I get those details? That's what you're looking for. What do you need? How do you get those details? In your reading, obviously, you're going to have a much more academic definition of research. So research is the controlled, objective, and systematic gathering of information for the purpose of describing and understanding. And I think that describing and understanding is really important. If you're getting data as you research that doesn't help you understand a situation and doesn't describe what's going on, you're not getting the right data. You're either using the wrong research instruments, you're looking in the wrong place, or you don't fully understand what you're looking at. So research is all about getting the foundation you need to do the best campaign possible. As you get into PR, as you start looking at campaigns, as you start running campaigns, you will begin to identify, hey, where this fell apart is probably because research was not done properly. We didn't have the answers we needed before we started. We weren't prepared for this contingency. Anytime we're talking about research, there's really two measurements you want to consider. You want to look at validity and reliability. Those two things are really important when we're talking in research, when we're talking about something applying beyond just your personal experience. So validity is when research measures what it said it would. When you set out to get information, you have to actually make sure you're checking in on the things you said you would. So for example, if you are wanting to find out what people think of the CAF, and you decide to poll the senior class, and you say, you know, when you're eating lunches throughout the week, do you feel like it's highly healthy? Is it something you put a lot of importance on? Do you generally skip lunch? What do you think about lunch times and your academic schedule? What could potentially be a problem with the situation I just gave? Yeah?
A lot of seniors don't have a meal plan because they live on campus.
Exactly. You're asking all these questions about lunch because you're trying to find out information about the CAF, but they're going to tell you about their lunches that they either made, they ate off campus, so all your information isn't valid. It's not measuring what you set out to do. And you'd be surprised how often that happens. Either you're talking to the wrong people, or you're asking the wrong question, or you're getting the information at the wrong time. Like how strongly do you like this event? How likely would you be to donate? And you ask the person before they attend the fundraising event, like on their way in. They're going to have a different answer on their way out than on their way in. Reliability is, can it be duplicated? When you go out and you research something and you find something, some sort of data, can I go out and do the same type of research and find that data again? Was it one time or multiple times? And reliability is really important, especially when you're saying things like an entire community is upset that we're changing this factory, or that we're planning to do this layoff, or that we are launching this new product. If a whole community is upset about it, I should be able to find that out as well as you. So questions you ask as you're starting to think, what kind of research should I do? What is the problem or opportunity, if you want to be optimistic, which I usually like to? What are you struggling with? What are you doing your whole campaign around? Because as you answer that, you're going to start to understand what kind of research you need to go after. What kind of information is needed is based on what kind of problem there is. How will the results of the research be used? When you want to get research, it's typically so you can apply it to the situation. So you know how to do a program, so you know what next steps to take, so you know who else to talk to. So you need to understand what kind of research, what specific publics should be reached. In that example, just a few moments ago, seniors aren't on campus typically eating lunch in the caf with meal plans, right? So we're reaching the wrong public if they're who we polled in a survey. How soon do you need the information? Some kinds of research take a long time. You have to go out, you have to create a way to get data, then you collect the data, then you analyze the data, and others are really quick. Interviews, man on the streets. How much will it cost? That's a realistic question, especially once you get into the agency world. If you're wanting scientific research, like a national poll, that's going to be quite substantial in terms of budget because you're going to pay a lot of money for that. How should I do it? So are you going to do internal research? Are you going to conduct it for your organization? Or are you going to do external research and have a different group hired on? Because there's a lot of research agencies. So maybe you're not equipped to get the level of data that you need. Maybe you want to bring on someone scientific. A lot of times in political campaigns, they'll hire someone to do the research because they need up-to-the-minute quality research. So you can conceptualize it by saying, who are you trying to reach, and what would you like them to do? With which message will you communicate that? Because that essentially is everything in a campaign, right? You're identifying your public, you're identifying how you're hoping to influence their values, their opinions, their beliefs, or their behavior, and you're saying which message you're going to use to get it out there, because that's what we are concerned with. How do we manage that communication? How do we get it from an organization out to the publics? So does what you are researching provide answers to the questions you are needing? When you've identified the audience, when you've identified what you're trying to get them to do, and you look at the kind of research, is it going to match up? Sometimes you're going to figure out we don't need that research at all. And it gives you the answers to what's happening now. At the end of all of your research, before you launch into the programming, the second phase of public relations, you should have a robust understanding of what is currently going on. The entire picture is your goal, because you don't want to leave anything out. If you do, your whole campaign could fail because you forgot to check into something. Does that seem to make sense? You guys kind of understand the value of this research? It's the foundation for everything you guys are going to set out to do. And today there's going to be a lot of notes, and I'm going to trust that you guys are such good note takers. I'll put this up online as well, because there's a lot of details I don't want you to miss, but we'll just kind of keep going through them. There's a lot of reasons to use research. First, you achieve credibility. It's not just your opinion. It's not just, I feel like this is a good idea. It's you're actually verifying it. You define audience and segment publics. You don't want to waste your time in public relations. There's too much to do, and it's too competitive in this industry. So by doing research, you know how to be strategic. That's a core part of public relations, is strategic, is planning, is deliberate. Without your research, you're going to fail. You need to formulate strategies, test messages, and help the management keep in touch with what's happening in the situation. All of that is achieved through research, because it's going to answer the questions you have about audiences, about perceptions, about beliefs, about attitudes. So all of those are reasons to use research regularly. You also can prevent crises through the use of research. Your reading talked about 90% of organizational crises are caused by internal operational problems. That means, had a public relations professional mostly been scanning and doing research, they might have prevented some of those. Now, obviously, a crisis is a crisis. Emergencies come up because you don't plan them. But a lot of them, you could maybe have done research and seen something on the horizon, discontent with employees, a product that wasn't working, something coming up that you would have been able to prevent. You could monitor competition, sway public opinion, generate publicity, and measure success. Anything you want to ascribe a value to, you really need to do research. You need to have a start amount and an end amount. You need to know the temperature of what's happening in the culture. You need to understand what people believe before you can sway them to believe something else. How do I know the community doesn't like us if I haven't done research to figure that out? How do I know the community loves us if I haven't done research to figure it out? It can't just be your gut reaction. You have to have verifiable data. So there's some terms that we use in research. There's categories that it's broken into. You have qualitative versus quantitative research, and you have primary versus secondary research. So those are terms I want you to definitely understand, be able to use, and it's something that from here on out, I'll refer to different kinds of research with these terms. Qualitative, if you have trouble remembering it, it's really about the quality. So it's someone really likes, someone doesn't like, they feel good about, they don't feel good about, they're likely to, they're not likely to. Those are kind of feelings. And you would get that through interviews and through personal reactions, maybe reading social media posts. Those kind of give you quality, right? People feeling things. Quantitative is a number. So as soon as you start doing statistics, as soon as you're running polls, as soon as you're showing measurements, that becomes quantities, so quantitative. Typically, people use quantitative data as more verifiable. It's, we ran this survey and here's the numbers that go with it. We'll talk through how that works. Primary versus secondary. Primary means you did the research. You went out, you found it, it's the first time it's been generated. Secondary means you're getting it from someone else. They already had that information and you're using it. For a lot of your campaigns while you're a student, you'll probably be using secondary research. And secondary is also the best place to start any research. You get historical data through research. You find out what other PR people have done. You look at other surveys. There's a lot of information that saves you time and money because someone else has done it. So you start at secondary and you identify what you might need to do for primary research. Those make sense? Qualitative, quantitative, primary versus secondary? Any questions? Okay, so we're going to dive into different types of research. We read about it, but I want to really talk through it. So first of all, secondary. It's archival research is sometimes used to describe secondary. Library and online databases, that is secondary. When you go to the library, you're researching journals, you're researching articles, that's secondary research. When you go on the web, that means someone else created it first. They put that information out there. All of those are forms of secondary, and they're actually very helpful. There are some quality public relations journals that would give you a lot of insight into campaigns because they're the latest news that's come out. It's the latest standards, latest measurements, latest campaigns. But all of that's secondary because someone else did it. Very easy to access, a lot of information out there, and it's someone else's generation. Does that make sense? Cool. Qualitative, your reading talked about 5 qualities. We could break this up into different ways, but I'm going to try to model your reading. So it talked about content analysis, interviews, focus groups, copy testing, and ethnographic techniques. I'm going to walk through each of those to talk about how you would get qualitative research from that. And again, qualitative is the quality, someone liking, someone's feeling, someone's opinion, something, almost a personal snapshot of something. It's not the mass, it's individualized. And that's why a lot of people like qualitative, because you get the story behind the numbers. When you look at a statistic, you don't always know the personal side to that. And so qualitative can give you a personal side to research. The first one was content analysis. So it's often used to measure media coverage. In public relations, one of the facets that we do is media relations. We work with journalists. We try to get our stories covered. We try to get in blogs and magazines and on talk shows and in the newspaper. Well, when that happens, we measure all of the media coverage, and that's content analysis because we're analyzing content. One of my favorite things about PR is that we don't use complicated terms. When it says content analysis, it's really just looking at content. We're looking for the percentage of how many people liked us when they covered that story. Was it good coverage, or did it have a negative tone? And what about the key messages? Because we're going to talk about how you develop key messages, how many of them carried your key messages, or how many of them were kind of abstract. I talked to some PR professionals last week talking about how to do research, and they were saying they've measured things like how many had photos, and were the photos black and white, or were they color? And how many contained quotes from like the CEO or top person versus just a reference. So all of those are things you can analyze, and you can put numbers to it, but it's more a perception, right? It's someone's tone, it's favorable, unfavorable. Did you include a quote? Did you not include a quote? So that's content analysis, and we do that a lot. Any questions on content analysis? Okay. Interviews. Interviews are big. We do them all the time. You guys have probably been a victim of intercept interviews. Ever been walking through the mall or trying to get to Disneyland and the people with the clipboards come up and say, hey, just have a few questions? Okay, yeah, me too. I'm a sucker for it. I just feel bad because I know how hard it is to get those interviews. Well, those are intercept interviews. They're really unscientific and unreliable because it's not that everyone has an equal chance. If they're doing the survey right in front of Disneyland, the kind of people who are going to be there are the people who go to Disneyland, which is a certain population. They typically last 2 to 5 minutes, and they can't be very in-depth. It's usually like check boxes typically, but it can give you some data. We have done that. Another type is purposive interviewing, which is kind of like purposeful, if you see that part. So it's carefully selected and it's determined by expertise. You may determine that you need to do interviews with the CEOs of the top major industries within public relations to get an idea of a changing technology, something like that. You would then purposely select those people. It wouldn't be random. It's not just whoever you talk to. You're talking to CEOs that brought about this technology change because they have a specific kind of information that you want to get to. You want to understand their perspective. Focus groups help identify attitudes and motives of important publics. College students are usually brought into focus groups a lot. They bribe you guys with pizza, things like that. And it's nice because you want people to feel comfortable and have a conversation. So a focus group is usually people sitting around a table. There's going to be a facilitator, and they'll ask questions and try to get people to dialogue. One of my peers had done a focus group talking about, I think it was the Real Housewives of Florida, and the perceptions that did for women, what that meant to them. So she brought a group of women together, and they were doing a focus group on what influence that had on them. It's informal research because it's not highly scientific, and it develops qualitative information because people are going to be sharing about the quality, favorable views, unfavorable views, perceptions, and it's not really necessarily statistics. You can get statistical information out of it. You could hold 10 focus groups. There's been groups who've done that. They go around the country and hold focus groups in specific areas, and then they compare the data. Typically, if you were doing a focus group for a company, you might do it 2 or 3 times, usually in the same area. It's not going to be too scientific. But one thing that focus groups do provide is a foundation. You start to recognize opinions or attitudes or ideas that you might want to research further in a poll to get national and quantitative information. Copy testing. Public relations professionals, we write all the time. We write for the news, we write for speeches, we write for brochures, we write for social media. You do all kinds of writing in public relations. And one of the things that can sometimes happen, just like in a verbal presentation, is you write something, yet somehow people don't respond how you thought they would. I don't know if you guys have had this experience. You're talking, and the person you're talking to, you're like, how did you miss what I was saying? It was so obvious. So we do copy testing, and that's where you send out information, and you can have people do like readability formulas. So how easy is it for people to understand? What level of knowledge do you have to have? But you can also do memorability. So do people remember what you wrote when you go back and you test them a little while later? Do they like the content? All of those things let you know how the public might respond. Because if you're like me, you can get very attached to your copy. You worked hard on it. You really refined it. But by doing copy testing, which will be primary because you're the ones running it, but it's qualitative because it's a quality data, it'll let you refine that a little more before you printed 100 million copies of something, right? Ethnographic techniques are really about experiencing a culture. So ethnographic techniques could be someone going undercover. Anyone watch Undercover Boss? Okay, yeah, I like Undercover Boss. These bosses, they pretend to be a worker in one of their companies and they see what it's like. That's ethnographic research. They go in to experience it in a way that doesn't change the environment, but they get a firsthand experience. If a boss went undercover and wanted to see what the customer's service was like, or what the buying experience was like, those are all ethnographic. So those could be considered role-playing to see what the public are experiencing. It's a kind of research. It's not very formal, but it does give you information. So those were the 5 kinds of qualitative research your book talked about. I think you had a couple others, but those were ones to hit on. All of those make sense? Kind of feel more familiar with those terms? Okay, I know it's a lot, guys, but we'll get through it. Quantitative research. So we covered qualitative. Now we're switching to quantitative, and those are the numbers. Remember the statistics. It can be more costly. Actually, it will be more costly, almost definitely. But it is more scientific. It tends to have more credibility when you have quantitative information. And it's definitely important when stakes are high. That's why presidential candidates, they'll look at how much sway they have in different states with percentages, or when you're getting ready to go into a new market, or when you are trying to launch a new product. You definitely want quantitative information. It's scientific, it's going to be verifiable, it's going to be reliable, and you're going to have a lot of depth to that. There's different kinds of sampling you can do. Random sampling is everyone has an equal chance, every single person. So it would not be random sampling if you were to stand in front of Disneyland, right? Because not everyone's going to Disneyland. But that'd be a non-probability survey, so it's not random at all, and it could lead to misleading results. You wouldn't really use that for scientific, but it could give you the starting point, the idea of what kinds of questions you should be asking. Survey creation can be hard, we'll talk about that, but you might not even know exactly how to ask the question that you're needing to get answers to. Quota sampling is a random sample that matches statistical characteristics of the audience. Now, I know that starts to sound intimidating. I think it's really a smart idea to take business stats if you're in public relations, because research, again, is our bread and butter. It forms the foundation for successful campaigns. But essentially, what you want to understand is, how do you get proper data? How do you make sure people had equal opportunity to be represented? And how do you make sure that the population that you're polling or interviewing or researching has an exact representation, hopefully, of the national population or global population? Because you can't make implications nationally if it's not representative of it, right? We could take a poll in this class, but I wouldn't say that represents the US. And it wouldn't represent the global sphere, right? It's just not representative. So as a PR person, you have to be careful where you get your answers from. Sample size is something your reading talked about. National polling is about 1,000 to 1,500, and that gives you an error within about 3 points 95% of the time. So typically, you're going to see national polls have around that number of people. Local sampling is much smaller, but you have more variance, more likelihood for something to be off. So these are all areas you'd want to keep in mind. Again, when I said the length of time for research and the cost for research, it goes up. When you're doing national, when you're doing local, when you're doing quantitative versus qualitative, you can start to see why it would take more time. You have to find a way to reach all those people and to get their data and to analyze their data. Okay, so questionnaires. I mentioned questionnaires can be hard, but there's some things that you should just know. Wording is important. So no loaded questions. That's something that sometimes people like to do because you can get any answer you want, right? So for example, if you are environmentally friendly, right? You could have, do you favor protecting the earth so that it doesn't die out for children of future generations? Most people, I can't think of anyone who says, no, I don't favor protecting the earth. But that's not really how the non-loaded question would be phrased, right? Because it implies a certain judgment. So you'd have to provide a question that's not loaded, such as, would you be likely to recycle 3 times a week? Something like that. That's less of an implied statement, but you're measuring. You need to consider timing and context. When you're sending out a survey, for example, you guys probably watched a huge PR battle going on right now about gun rights, right? So surveys that went out right after a shooting would likely have different results than a survey that goes out further from a shooting. Does that make sense? So as a PR person, keep that in mind, because you can twist data if you do it at certain times. Sure, there's going to be a different response, but is that accurate? And that's something you want to be as a PR person. You want to be accurate. You want to be committed to truth. If that's not how the general public feels, maybe your job should be to influence values, opinions, beliefs, and behaviors, but you want to accurately know what they're thinking. Don't poll at the wrong time. And avoid politically correct answers, because just as you don't want the loaded question, there's some questions people feel obligated to say. They want to respond in a certain way because it seems polite. And so if you give a polite answer, they most likely will choose that answer, even if it's not what they believe, because we have these constraints of socially constructed things where we want to be viewed as polite. So we'll choose that. So avoid loaded, avoid politically correct, and think about the timing and the context. So that's why you give a range of possible answers. and have them all sound good. You don't want to have the one that you're hoping to have everyone pick sound like really nice and really great, and then all the others sound like you're an awful person if you select them. Obviously, your data is going to be skewed, and that you don't want skewed data. Your goal is not to get data that shows your opinion. Your goal is to get data that accurately reflects the situation, so you can do your job as a PR person. And then the question is, how do you reach people with these surveys? So surveys can go out via mail or telephone. You can do personal interviews, omnibus or piggyback, where you kind of tie in with other organizations. You can do web or email surveys. More and more people tend to do email or web surveys because, one, it's less expensive, but you get faster results. So when you get mailed a survey, a lot of those get thrown away, right? But you had to pay for that. If you email a survey and someone doesn't respond, it's not like you necessarily paid for it. You typically pay on when people respond. So you have to weigh costs, you have to weigh timing, you have to weigh how long will someone fill out an email survey versus a telephone. Who has telephone numbers now? Because not all of landlines, how many of you have landlines? Yeah, it's less and less. So cell phone numbers aren't published, landlines are. Those kind of things are all impacting how we do audience research. Some other research, we're just going to keep going. Situational analysis. You're looking at internal and external factors. And a lot of people use a SWOT analysis to do that. So sometimes situational analysis, sometimes called SWOT. I'm going to show you how to do a SWOT one. But essentially, they're looking inside and outside. It's a free type of research because you're going to do it yourself. You're going to identify the factors. Typically, you got those factors through primary, because you were looking it up, research, or secondary research that you did yourself that is qualitative. You might look through archives for the history of an organization. You might look at how other groups have faced this before. You might look at opinions. All of this can be done on your own without hiring a company, and you can get the strong foundation. So here's what a SWOT would really look like. SWOT tends to look like a grid. This would start to fill out. You have strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, hence the name SWOT, because it's just the first letter. And it's looking inside and outside the organization. So the top, the strengths and weaknesses, that's about the organization. Those are things you would identify inside. So do you have low manpower? Or do you have an empowering boss? Or do you have a high buy-in from employees? Do you have a weak reporting structure? All of those things are about the organization, and you list them under strengths or weaknesses. Opportunities and threats are external. They're things that are going to happen in the publics around you, in the environment, with the economy, things that you can't really control as your organization, but they still have a direct impact on you. Strengths and opportunities, then, you should probably be able to easily identify, are those things that are going to help you achieve your objective. Remember when you said you identified your problem or your opportunity? Strengths and opportunities are what gets you there. Weaknesses and threats are what can keep you from reaching those. So you've identified things that you need to address in your campaign, both positive and negative. And that's a really, really easy way to do something, and you can kind of compile all your data into one area, especially if you have archival research that you've done. You can put in surveys, and you really treat it like a bullet point list. You would just fill in under those. All of this research, everything you do, whether you did primary or secondary, probably some of both, qualitative or quantitative, it results at the very end, you develop a problem statement. I like to call them opportunity statements. These statements come before you get into your programming, and it's a present tense that describes the current situation, what is going on right now with the organization, how you got here. And it's specific and measurable, so it's what is the source of concern? Where is the problem? When is it a problem? Who is involved? How are they involved? And why is this a concern? But you can't imply a solution or blame, because this is simply stating what's going on. It's stating where the situation is and who is involved, because you've done all the research. You know what publics are involved, both internal and external. You've identified when it's a problem. You've identified where the problem is located within the organizational structure. You've identified how you might want to address it because you know why it's a concern. You know how each person plays a role because you did all of your research to understand all of the dynamics that have played into this. We are experts at communication. You can't be an expert if you haven't done your research. If you get to trying to make a problem statement and you haven't looked at all of the nuances that made it, if it's very like, oh, this is such a simple solution, you probably did not do your research very well, because communication is complex. Organizations are complex. And when those things start to collide, you're going to have a very difficult situation that you're looking at, trying to understand what is everything that led to this. Now we're going to go through programming. And this section has a lot of vocabulary and a lot of methods of how you're going to present information, which is really important, because when you do your campaigns, you're going to want to understand this part. It's really the bulk of the PR section. So I personally love this section, but I'm sure it's a lot when you're first sitting there and you're getting introduced to it all. So we're just going to kind of go step by step. But you need to identify what you're doing before you start doing it, and that's why you want research, because it's not just going to be at the whims of, let's do blue, let's do pink, let's do this, let's do that. You have verifiable research. And then you get to your program plan. So your reading talked about what a program plan is, and it is a really key part before you dive into public relations. Program plan is a formal, written presentation of your research findings and program recommendations for strategies, tactics, and evaluations. So by the end of these 2 weeks, you're going to identify all of those terms. You're going to know that strategies are a very specific thing. Tactics are really unique. You're going to understand a program plan versus a complete campaign, and you're going to be able to do a program plan. That's the goal, is that by the end of this class, you're doing program plans, you're doing campaigns, and you're able to use all of those different pieces at the necessary times, because you don't always need each piece, but you do want to know how to use them. So the elements of a program plan, you will want to memorize this. There are 8 parts to it. You have a situation, which is essentially identified through your research. You did all of that background to identify the situation. You're going to have objectives, an audience, which will usually have multiple audiences, strategies, tactics, a calendar and timetable, budget, and evaluation. Those are the components. So again, that definition we had was a written, formal presentation of your research findings with recommendations. This is how you present it. This is how you would have the various pieces. So whether you're making a report and doing headlines, you would want to identify all of these areas. Does that make sense? Okay, definitely make sure you memorize the 8 components of a program plan, because they play a part through the rest of all of your PR courses and the profession. So we're going to kind of look at the situation. If you think back to our 4 stages, we had research. The situation falls into research. Programming kind of covers objectives, audience strategies, and tactics. Implementation is your calendar and budget, and evaluation is in the evaluation. So that's how the 8 elements of a program plan relate to the 4-stage process of PR, the RPI model. I want you guys to understand how they go together, and also be able to identify which piece is where, because you want to know what you should cover at various sections. And when you're making client pitches, when you're writing up a proposal, when you're looking at your research, you want to identify all of those. Your program plan is basically everything you could need. You're going to look backwards for the historical context. You're going to look around for what publics are thinking and feeling. These are all research questions to get the situation. You're going to look inside. Remember when we talked about a SWOT analysis? Strengths and weaknesses could be policies, mission statements, vision statements. What makes the organization tick? Why is it running the way it does? You could look ahead. So is the mission attainable? Is what the company set out to do possible? How does PR fit in with that vision? Where do you play a part in making them reach their mission, their values, their objectives? All of that are things you do in the situation stage, which just coming out of talking about what research is, you should see how those questions fit into research. You should be able to think through, okay, you could get a looking backward. If you wanted to get historical context, do you think, what kind of research would you do? Primary, secondary, qualitative, quantitative? Secondary, yeah. Someone already has it. It's already in archives somewhere. Would it be qualitative or quantitative? Probably depends on what you pull out of those archives. If they've done surveys before historically, then you're going to have some quantitative data. you're probably going to have a lot of qualitative bios of different people, the mission statement, the statement about the organization's objectives, all of those that were kind of at the founding would be qualitative. They wouldn't be scientific. Looking around what publics are thinking and feeling. If you're getting surveys from other people, that would be quantitative, but secondary. Looking inside is primary, but probably qualitative. You're talking to people, you're seeing what they think, what they feel, maybe holding some focus groups and looking ahead. That could be both, depending what kind of, research you decide to do. So with the situation, you really want to be able to answer, why is this a public relations situation? We've already talked about the difference between PR and marketing, PR and advertising, PR and journalism. So as you do your research, why is this public relations? You should be able to identify that. These are 3 things that are typical reasons for public relations. Usually any PR situation is going to fall into this somehow. So an organization must do something to overcome a bad reputation or something that went wrong. We do that a lot. We come in when there's been a problem. That makes it a PR situation. Or there's a one-time project launch or new product service where they're trying to get the brand out there. They're really trying to introduce something new. And it could be a person, it could be a product, it could be a service, but it's about influencing values, opinions, beliefs, and behaviors to think this is great, we want to be part of this. Or it could be reinforcing something that's already going well, continuing to build that. Disney is a great example of that. They're constantly reinforcing their family-friendly brand, and that's public relations. So PR situations, something went bad and we're coming in, something's launching for the first time, or we're reinforcing values, opinions, beliefs, and behaviors. So can you, as you look at different PR situations, when you're picking out your campaigns, when you are working on different projects, can you identify where the PR problem is or situation? You'll want to understand those 3 reasons groups use PR. Then you come up with your goal. Now a goal is a very broad statement and it guides the entire program plan from here on out. It's important. It's really important to know what your goal is, but it's broad. So for example, Biola's broad statement would be to become a recognized leader in Christian thought leadership. That is their broad goal. That's where they're headed. So for your PR campaign, you want to be able to make a broad statement to know where people are headed, where your group is headed, what their overall goal is, right? Your goal, you have one goal for your campaign. You're not going to have multiple goals. You have one goal that you're heading towards. And that is supported by multiple objectives. An objective is a shorter, more specific statement. And you could think about it as saying who is going to do what, when, and why, and to what standard of measurement. I'll show you what that means. But essentially, this is a specific statement. This is where you're measuring. This is where you're saying, here's what we're going to do. You identify the audience, who's going to do. You're identifying what is going to happen. You're putting a timetable on it by saying when. You're saying why and to what standard. How much are you increasing? So I'm going to show examples of that, how to write one. But it's really important to realize that there are 3 kinds of objectives you can have. You can have a knowledge objective, you can have a predisposition objective, or you can have a behavioral objective. This should be starting to make sense. If public relations is about influencing values, opinions, beliefs, and behaviors, every kind of objective is either going to be about knowledge, so that's something you know, a brand, becoming familiar with something. Predisposition, a value, an opinion, and then behavior, right? So it's either what you know, what you feel, or how you're acting. Your objective must be one of those 3 kinds. Does that make sense to you guys? It has to be one of those 3 kinds. So the goal is where you want to be, and the objective are the steps you're going to take to get there. That's how you can differentiate those 2. When you're writing out different parts of a PR plan, I don't want you to confuse these 2. If you use the word goal, I'm going to assume that you're talking about the one long-term objective of that, or long-term goal. The objective is how you're reaching that goal. You could have 2 to 3 objectives in a campaign. You would have one goal. Your objectives help make the goal happen. Now, when you write out an objective, it's typically one sentence, and you can use an acronym to help you. You want to use SMART. So when you do this on tests, when you do it for your campaign, I will be looking to see if you made SMART objectives. They have to be specific, they have to be measurable, they have to be achievable, realistic, and timely. All of this is to help you know how to do your program plan and also to evaluate. Next week when we get to the evaluation phase, you're going to understand why this is so important. But a specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely objective lets you know whether you succeeded or not, and it also guides the entire process forward. So what do I mean? The first one, by July 1, to increase the number of local homeowners from 13% to 27% who know that wildland fires destroyed 2,500 homes during the past 3 fire seasons. This might be an objective for a fire department wanting to educate the public, right? This is a knowledge objective. They're wanting to educate people. They're wanting them to be aware of it. Now it's specific, right? I identified who it was, homeowners. It's measurable, going from 13% to 27%. I know exactly how much I have to increase. It's timely, I put a date in there. It's achievable, and it's realistic, depending on how much money you have to launch this campaign. This next one, to increase the percentage of employees who use seatbelts when driving on the job from the current 51% to at least 70%. Is that a SMART objective? Yeah? There's an element missing. It's almost SMART.
There isn't a time.
Yeah, I never said when I could do that. I could be 95 by the time that comes. That's not really fair when I'm making a campaign to be like, oh, whoa, 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 it's still going on. You need to put your time frame in there. It looks like it's going to be SMART. It's almost SMART. Put a time frame in there and it will be. What kind of objective? I told you there's 3 kinds of objectives. This one was a knowledge one. What's this one? Yeah, I want people to change what they're doing. Then you go to the next stage. So you've had your goal, you've made some objectives that are going to help you get there, and every single objective is SMART. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And then you have to figure out who you're targeting, your audience, which you identified already, most likely in that objective. But it needs to be a specific group. It needs to be really defined, because when you think about it, when you're talking to people and you're sending a message, you have to understand who they are. I talk to my mom in a certain way. I understand how she thinks, her background, what she believes, so I'll talk to her very differently than I talk to my sister. My sister and I have a huge age gap between us. She is 18, going to be a college freshman this next fall. I talk to her very differently than my parents, who are quite a bit older than that and in a different stage of life. And I do that because I know they're different people. In public relations, we don't mass produce a campaign. We are about the people. We're about reaching them where they're at. That means you need to know the audience you're talking to. That's why it has to be specific. Who are you talking to? What are their values? What makes them tick? What are they passionate about? What do they care about? How will they respond? That's important for a PR person to understand. That's why you'll probably have multiple audiences, especially if you have multiple objectives, then you're gonna have multiple audiences. But typically, you wanna break the audience into multiple segments, because the more specific you are, the better you can be at getting your message to them. In your reading, you should have identified several kinds of public. So you might have a latent public, an aware public, an active public, or a passive public. All of those are different. We interact with them differently. Active publics, just like their name said, I'm telling you, PR is great with their terms. They're very active. They want to be involved. They're doing a lot of things. You may have an aware public, but they're not necessarily taking the actions you're hoping they are. A passive public who doesn't really care, they don't really even care to be informed about the issue. Or a latent public, not even aware that there is an issue to be informed about, so they can't be passive because they're not even on the radar. You want to identify your public. So you reached your audience, you said, here's our group. What kind of audience are they going to be? Active, passive, latent, aware. And then you consider things like how to make a public. So are you looking at geographic? Maybe you're going to say people who live in La Mirada, people who live in South Orange County, people who live in Oklahoma, people who live in Florida, people who live abroad. You can make publics differentiated based on location. You could do it on demographics, psychographics, covert power, position, reputation. There's so many ways you can break publics. Don't just think in your mind, it has to be on age, or it has to be on income level, or it has to be on race. There are so many ways that differentiate people or unite people in different circumstances. For example, if you were all looked at demographically, you probably wouldn't have been grouped together, except maybe your age group. But because you're in this class, you could be a specific public. Perhaps some of you are die-hard Star Wars fans. Perhaps some of you hate Star Wars. But maybe I would target Star Wars fans. Maybe some of you are foodies. You love to cook, you really love trying recipes, others of you don't. There are different ways that we could segment even this class to reach and convey concepts. So good PR people realize that people are different. There's different things that unite them, there's different things that segment them. Know how to divide your audience. Break down all those who are involved into categories so you can identify, here's the audience groups, and here's the messages we're going to use to get to them. Okay, we've gone through a goal, we've gone through objectives, we've gone through how to identify your audiences, and now we're down to strategies. Strategies describe how and why campaign components will achieve the objective. So objectives support the goal, strategies support the objective. They contain key messages, and it embraces theories of communication, which we'll talk about more. But strategies are kind of the roadmap for how you're getting somewhere. And this is what it says. So an example is build brand success awareness among media and licensees, communicate Pokemon's leadership and staying power. This was a strategy from a Pokemon campaign. It doesn't really have many specifics, but they had an objective stated, and this is one of the ways they were going to do it. They were going to build brand awareness. And they also were going to have a strategy of announcing a new licensing partnership. Those were two things they were going to do to help achieve an objective they had stated about awareness. And awareness, which is a knowledge objective. So it's how you're going to achieve the objective. Typically, a goal will have a couple objectives, 2 to 3. And an objective will have a couple strategies supporting it, probably 3 or 4. Key messages then, remember they just said they were going to reach specific audiences, they were going to announce. If I wanted to make an announcement, I might say teachers, parents, middle school students, and high school students. I don't know if high school students like Pokemon, but this is a good example, right? So then I would say for all of these demographics, they would all somehow influence the brand. I will speak to them differently. They will care about different things. And I will create key messages. They all say essentially the same thing. They're all carrying my message, but it's made for different people at different stages that care about different things. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay, we'll keep working with it. Tactics then support strategies. So these are the nuts and bolts. These are what you're doing. You are reserving, you're making invitations, you're sending out a press release, you're holding a junket, you are launching a new line, you are creating a box of giveaways. It's everything you do. And typically what happens is people get an idea, they have a goal in public relations, and they skip over everything and they go down to tactics, which is what's really problematic. Because you don't have your objectives, so you're not measuring anything. You don't have your strategies, which are your large overarching things, and you don't have your audiences. You're just getting to the fun part where you get to do the awesome things that we do. And it is really fun to get into that, but you have to know why. It has to be strategic, it has to be deliberate, it has to be measurable. So here's an example. If the strategy is to announce a new partnership, a tactic would be maybe to announce it at a trade show. That's one area we're going to announce it. And then announce the Cartoon Network will be the top-rated place for Pokemon. Those are two tactics that go under the idea of making an announcement. Where are we going to announce it? How are we going to announce it? Those are the what we get to do now that this is our strategy. So tactics support a strategy. You'll probably have a lot of tactics under strategies. So you can start seeing how these get very big. You have one goal, 2 or 3 objectives, 2 or 3 strategies under the objectives, and tactics under those strategies. It starts getting huge, right? Budget sometimes comes in this part. Some people put it in the implementation, some people put it in the programming. We're going to cover it today. PR is part of business. You cannot ignore budget. That's the worst thing you can do. It gives us a really bad reputation if we make all of these proposals for grand ideas and we pretend that we have no idea it's going to cost a lot of money. So know the cost of what you're proposing. Understand that every hour you put into something is a cost to the employer because they're paying your salary. And when you say you want to reserve somewhere, what's the cost of that? Do they have a reservation fee? Do they have a fee for catering? If you want to get something printed, what is the cost of printing it? What is the cost of designing it? What is the cost of mailing it out? If you want to propose doing research and getting strong, quantitative, primary research, what's the cost of that going to be? So you add all of the cost in this program plan. Remember, the program plan is your written, formal presentation. So how much is it going to cost? And you can put it on a spreadsheet then and manage it. Historically, some people feel like PR people are really bad with money and numbers. I'm hoping we change that. This is going to be a generation that needs to grapple with that because we're a core part of business. And right now with this economy, there's not a lot of wiggle room, so we need to be good at budgeting. You can think of two categories. You have staff or time, and you can think of out-of-pocket, things that are supplies or external, not the human factor. And usually, you customize it to client's budget. And we'll talk about some different billing ways. I don't think we do it next. Good. Okay. So I want to recap because this is a lot. This is a lot of information, but it forms the foundation for public relations. Once you guys have this down, it's going to be so much easier because you're going to use these terms. You're going to understand how to implement it. It's just a lot to take in. So we have covered research. We've covered that there's primary and secondary, qualitative and quantitative. And we looked at various ways you can do research. And then we jumped into the program plan, which has 8 components. The first one is a situation, and that's largely defined by the research you did. You come up with a problem statement at the very end that says what's going on. And then you get into creating a goal, making your objectives, identifying your audience, getting a strategy, supporting those with tactics, and looking at the budget. Next week, we're going to talk about the calendar, the timetable, and then evaluation. And that will complete the entire PR process. That's the bare bones, that's a skeleton. And then we get to the fun part, where you get to fill it out with the things you're passionate about, the things you care about, coming alongside of organizations and saying, I know how to do this. Let me come alongside of you because I can figure this process out. It's really simple once you have it down. Does anyone have questions on the research part or the programming part? Okay, we're gonna do some exercises that work with this. I'm gonna walk around. I want you guys doing everything we talked about. I want you practicing making smart objectives and identifying, is that a knowledge objective? Is it a predisposition objective? Is it a behavioral objective? I want you understanding the differences between strategies and tactics. That's probably one of the biggest things I see people struggle with is they don't know how to identify the difference between a strategy and a tactic. Goals and objectives you can identify pretty quickly because objectives have the numbers in them and the time. And then strategy and tactics, somehow people just mix them up. So I really want to focus on you guys understanding the difference between those so that you're set to go.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.